that says that nuclear wars cannot be won, therefore they should never be fought. And that's supposed to be a foundational premise. And yet our nuclear posture actually talks about how nuclear wars can be fought and why we expect to win them. So there, we see a certain amount of insanity. Most recently, the nuclear posture review, and then what's followed up is the nuclear employment plan, which is a very classified document. It's basically the nuclear war, the war plans. It went through a restructuring under Joe Biden because we were concerned about the limitations placed upon the American force by New START treaty, the last remaining arms control treaty that capped the number of deployed strategic weapons at 1,550. And this was a bilateral treaty between the United States and Russia. When the treaty was negotiated in 2009, 2010, China wasn't a factor. It was a nation that possessed several hundred nuclear weapons. They had a nuclear posture, which was purely defensive in nature, the no first strike policy, older weapons. We weren't concerned. And yet the fact that the dilapidated state of the Chinese nuclear arsenal, strategic nuclear arsenal, caused us to get cocky. When we spoke about Taiwan, the hint was always if China were to move on Taiwan, we'd intervene, and if China resisted us, conventionally in a manner which placed our intervention at risk, we would respond with nuclear weapons. And one of the things we talked about was the concept of a preemptive nuclear strike, because China's nuclear arsenal was so small that we could actually use very little of our nuclear arsenal and eliminate China's nuclear capabilities. Well, the Chinese listened. And of course, China being China, decided that they were going to engage their very good defense industrial base, and they began to build new nuclear weapons. DF-41 is a solid propellant ICBM that's better than anything we have. We can't even build a solid propellant ICBM anymore. The Sentinel, which we're trying to replace the Minuteman III, is prohibitively expensive. It may never get built. But the Chinese built the DF-41 rather quickly. Then they went out and they dug 300 holes in the western deserts of China and took 100 missiles and said, we're going to play, whack-a-mole. If you think you can take out our force, you have to target all 300. Now, that means that our targeting became very complicated because we don't know where they keep the missiles. And so we have to hit them all. And when you divert a strike package for 300 separate targets, it's not one warhead per silo. We actually have a plan, or there's ways that nuclear targeters talk about collapsing silos, probably classified, so I won't go into too much, but you allocate the capability to the desired result. But to do this with China, we suddenly were draining a significant portion of our nuclear arsenal, and they said we aren't unable to maintain the ability to strike Russia and China simultaneously under New START. So we redid how we target. And Theodore Postal has written a very good article about this, about changing the fusing and such, so that we now can do one weapon per silo. But the Chinese looked at this and they said, so you guys are preparing for a preemptive nuclear strike against us, and they further enhanced their nuclear capabilities, the stupidity. This is one of the driving factors behind the United States not renewing New START treaty in February of this year. We allowed it to expire because it's just easier for us to do away with arms control so we can build more nuclear weapons so that we have sufficient weaponry to take on the Chinese. But this is at the strategic level. This is still, we're dealing here with, you don't go from A to Z in this scenario, Z being nuclear exchange. There's a lot of conventional, escalation ladder stuff that's going to take place beforehand. Premise on the notion that we maintain, as Trump said in his national security strategy document, that we will maintain conventional power overmatch over the Chinese. We have this belief that our technology and the quantity of weapons and the quality of weapons is such that we have overmatch against China conventionally, and this alone settles the issue of whether or not there would be a nuclear war with China, because China will be defeated by us conventionally, and we don't have to worry about this escalation. This is premised on things such as sufficient quantities of long-range standoff strike weapons, sufficient quantities of anti-missile interceptors, PAC-3. These are all things that are factored into this thinking. The same holds true with Russia. If you remember back when the early on in the special military operation, the West put forward this notion that Putin was panicking. He wasn't, never has been, but we said he was panicking, and that he would use nuclear weapons against Kiev. There was a big fear in 2022, 2023 that, oh my God, the Russians are going to use nukes. And so NATO and the United States made a very public announcement about if Russia were to nuke Ukraine, the response would not be nuclear, but it would be conventional and overwhelming. That Russia would be taught a lesson that it's never experienced before. That if they dare put a nuke on Ukraine, our conventional overmatch is going to swamp them, come in, take out everything. It's going to be the end of Russia. Don't even think about it, Russia. Conventional overmatch, premised on long-range standoff weapons and high-quality ballistic missile interceptors to protect ourselves. Now we go to war against Iran. The first thing that happens is the concept of conventional overmatch immediately goes out the window. I don't know what these people were thinking. We couldn't beat the Iranians, and we were thinking we could beat the Chinese and the Russians. So right off, there's a problem with the quality of our weapons. They're not that good. They're not as good as we thought they were. There's also a problem with the quality of our targeting, having subordinated targeting away from targeteers like myself to Palantir-driven AI targeting models. We dumbed it down, which means that what we're hitting isn't hitting what we want to hit, etc. And then the Iranians were able to use ballistic missiles against us in a manner that caused us to use a lot of our interceptors. We ran out of ammunition, and we didn't defeat the enemy. That was a big problem. The 39-day war ended on day 39 because we simply ran out of the ability to continue the conflict. Now, we took a pause. Donald Trump admits that he lied about the MOU. He lied about it. He just was taking a pause to get oil and bring in ammunition. Where'd they get the ammunition? They stripped it from South Korea. They stripped it from Japan. They stripped it from Europe. They stopped sending ammunition to Ukraine and rediverted it to bring it all into the Middle East. And then we started the war up again, and we ran out of ammunition. And what did we do next? We went to our stockpiles. And the strategic reserves that the European war commanders and the Pacific war commanders rely upon. And we stripped those. And then we started renewing, and we ate through these. And when we're told that there is no more conventional munitions, this is the truth. We don't have sufficient long-range strike resources to last more than a week against the Chinese. We have no ability to defend ourselves against North Korean or Chinese ballistic missiles. We have depleted almost the totality of our high-quality PAC-3 things. The same thing in Europe. The idea of sending a devastating strike against the Russians is laughable. We don't have those weapons anymore. If you remember, General Chris Donahue earlier this year gave a speech at Wiesbaden when he spoke. He was the commander of U.S. forces in Europe, and he said, Kaliningrad is just 49 miles wide, and we can just take it off the map. We have the ability to do this. We've been preparing for years, precision targeting, etc. We can take everything out. Well, Chris, you can't do that when Chris is fired, so it doesn't matter who the guy took over. You can't do that because you don't have any ammunition. I mean, even if your targeting is good, you don't have the ammo anymore. Plus, now when the Russians respond, you can't defend yourself. So we have literally dropped ourselves down to where we cannot wage war at all. Conventional war, we can't wage conventional war now against a peer-level enemy. I'm not saying that we can't start one and win. We can't start one. It would be over on day one. We lack the capacity to inflict any meaningful harm, and we lack the capacity to defend ourselves against what would be an overwhelming response. Look at Ukraine today, no air defense. And it's just, could you imagine Europe being laid naked like this? And this is exactly what happened to Europe. They cannot defend themselves. Taiwan, there's no defense. Japan, there's no defense. South Korea, there's no defense. We have taken it all away. So now that Donald Trump has to acknowledge we don't have any ammunition, what do? We redo the nuclear posture. We are lowering the threshold for the use of tactical nuclear weapons, so that early on now in any campaign against China or Russia, where we would normally be using long-range standoff conventional weapons, we're going to go nuke early because we have no other option. So if we get into a shooting match with Russia over, say, Kaliningrad or the Baltics, or we get into a shooting match with China over Taiwan, we are going to be starting the war with tactical nuclear weapons because that's all we have left. That's it. And I just want people to understand that at no time has the Pentagon ever had a war game where we simulate the use of tactical nuclear weapons where it doesn't escalate rapidly to a general nuclear exchange where all humanity dies. And this is where we're at. This is the insanity of the moment. This Iran conflict has actually created an existential crisis for the world. So now we come back to what happened in February of this year, the termination of New START. There's been no desire, and Joe, you know me. This has been my passion. New START, keeping New START alive. I put everything I had into this. 2024, I made it part of, and I'm pretty proud because in 2024, because of the work we were doing, we actually got Donald Trump to say these things about nuclear weapons that were smart. Like, I don't want to start a nuclear war. These are the things I'm going to do. And it was like, wow, there's a response. There might be a chance here. Turns out there's no chance. The Russians have no interest. I went to Russia thinking that I was going to be able to engage on nuclear disarmament and was put in my place by the Russian government that said, we're just not interested in this topic at this time. And the Chinese have just been reticent against having any conversation about nuclear disarmament. They say that's a bilateral problem between the United States and Russia. Sort it out, and then we'll come in. This can't be allowed to continue. And I'm going to re-engage on this issue because we have to have arms control now. It's more important now than ever. I liken this scenario, the situation we're at right now, to the situation that exists in the late 70s, early 80s regarding intermediate nuclear forces. When the Soviets deployed their SS-20s and we responded by sending Pershing IIs and ground-launched cruise missiles into Europe, we were at hair trigger from imminent death. The reason why we suddenly decided that arms control was good is because everybody woke up one day and went, we're all going to die. All it takes is one mistake, one hiccup, and we're 7 minutes away. A Pershing II launched is 7 minutes away from hitting Moscow, which means there's no time for Moscow to react if an accidental launch takes place or if they detect a radar finding that turns out to have been wrong. This scared everybody. The Russians in 1983, Able Archer, put their SS-20 force on nuclear alert. It means the SS-20s were out of the field ready to launch against Europe any hiccup. That's how close we came to dying. And the people said, we can't do this. We signed the INF Treaty and we got rid of these weapons. This is the moment now that we're at. We have to get collective recognition, and China has to wake up to this too. Collective recognition that we have to find a way to bring arms control back in to stop this insanity. We can't have a situation where a major power like the United States has said we will use tactical nuclear weapons early on in a conflict. This is insanity. So the good news is I was introduced to the Chinese military attachés in Washington, D.C. and had a conversation with them. And the colonel responsible for arms control wants to talk and is talking about going to China and beginning to have the dialogue about this. Not negotiations. I'm not a U.S. government official, but this is unique that China is now saying, hey, we might want to actually explore concepts pertaining to arms control. And maybe the Russians will wake up on this as well. And who knows, maybe the Trump administration will finally grow a brain cell and decide that rather than committing collective suicide, maybe arms control that created a scenario where we wouldn't have to consider using tactical nuclear weapons early on in a conventional conflict. Maybe we wouldn't have to go down that route. So anyways, that was my article in a nutshell.
Into Russian territory, and Russia was threatening that it could lead to a nuclear war. And it didn't happen. Are we in a more dangerous situation now, my question, than we were at that time when Biden was first threatened?
Let's revisit this and talk about just how dangerous that time was. Because you're right, you were there. You remember the conversation we had with the staffer of it was actually with the principal. I won't use his name because he hasn't given us permission to use his name, but a very senior member of the party not in power. And he talked about the briefing that he had received, that they had collectively received about, from the CIA, are the Russians bluffing? And that was the question I said, are the Russians bluffing? Because the Washington Post was saying the Russians were bluffing. And I said, is this what you got? He said, no. The CIA actually said the Russians aren't bluffing and that there was a greater than 51% chance that there would be a nuclear war by the end of this year. But he said, that's not the scariest thing. The scariest thing was in the same room where the Biden administration officials, and when everybody looked at them, they went, yeah, nuclear war, we're ready. I mean, that's scary. And then you reflect on what Rear Admiral Buchanan, the J5, the nuclear plant for Strategic Command, said in November, late November, at a CSIS meeting in Washington, D.C. during the question and answer period, um, asked about the Russians and the Russians making nuclear, new nuclear posture, et cetera. He said that we are ready to have a nuclear exchange with Russia and win. So a nuclear exchange means nuclear war. People need to understand that. But the interesting thing is he said, maybe it's time we be honest with the American people about what winning means. Because it doesn't mean that life continues the way it does today. A nuclear war, even one which we won, means the end of America. It means the end of the constitutional republic because martial law will be declared. There will not be the infrastructure that we're used to. Life will be hell on earth. Literally, what the Biden administration decided is that in order to save America, they would have to destroy America. And they were ready to do it. That's pretty damn dangerous, Joe. That's a very, very, very dangerous situation. So now, is today more dangerous than that? I think we're at the same situation, the same level of insanity, because what the Trump administration is saying is that they are prepared to use nuclear weapons early on against Russia and China, and that they feel that this will be what's needed to achieve victory. So we're going to use these nuclear weapons, and if we use enough of them early on, because that's what this posture is about, not just using nuclear weapons earlier in the escalatory ladder, but to use enough of them early on that we win. So it's the same concept, the same insanity, which comes back to, a notion. When we talk about the nuclear enterprise, there's no difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. The nuclear enterprise, the American nuclear enterprise, is apolitical. It's a disease of America, an addiction of America to nuclear weapons. And it doesn't matter what your party affiliation is. At the end of the day, we will always default to going to nuclear war unless we get arms control. And we need John F. Kennedy, the spirit of Kennedy. We need, a visionary to recreate, to resurrect the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency and make arms control one of the driving factors of American diplomacy, no longer subordinate. What's happened recently is that we've done away with, dedicated arms control professionals. We now, for instance, under the Trump administration, the person responsible for arms control is also responsible for counterterrorism and counter narcotics, which means that arms control is at the bottom tier. Nobody's talking about arms control anymore. We need to make arms control a principle in the national security team with dedicated staff. And we have to say this is the primary focus of our national defense policy, is how to prevent a nuclear war. We have to re-engage diplomatically. We have to be understanding that we can't fight a nuclear war. And this is going to require the American people to wake up. Very rarely does anything happen in a vacuum in Washington, D.C., meaning on their own volition. You don't often get, politicians and bureaucrats to wake up one morning and go, I should have had a V8. We should be doing this completely different. There has to be political impetus. And this is where I think what Richard Wolff was talking about, these same kids that are out there, refamiliarizing themselves with socialism. I think these are also the same kids that we should be engaging with on issues relating to arms control and the necessity of nuclear disarmament, because the same future they're worried about economically is being threatened by nuclear weapons. And if they can start electing politicians, which they've proven they can do, maybe the politicians that are in power will understand that they have to change the way they're doing things in order to stay in power, to win this vote over. And if we make not just economic change in America, but national security change, like Gaza. People woke up about the genocide in Gaza, and well, Joe, you know that how I feel about Hind Rajab. You know how I feel about Gaza, and everybody should understand that it's very important to me. But Gaza is one place in the earth. A nuclear war destroys all of the earth, and we have to be engaged on nuclear disarmament because it it invokes a level of destructiveness that would make Gaza pale in comparison. Oh, here's the problem: both in Europe and in the United States. I mean, for decades now, when the Cold War ended, we had in the United States very advanced Russian area studies programs at our universities. And we trained military professionals and we trained diplomatic professionals to be subject matter experts. And these people understood the reality behind U.S. Russian relations. Today, we're not allowed to engage in an honest fashion intellectually on Russia. I mean, what I'm trying to do, I call it waging peace. I go to Russia. I investigate what I call the Russian reality. I capture it. I bring it back through a podcast and through writing and stuff like that. That was deemed by the Biden administration to be one of the great threats. I mean, that's why they took my passport, so I couldn't keep doing that, and that's why they raided my home to accuse me of being a Russian agent because that was not the message they wanted. They wanted to keep the dumbing down of Russia. Why? So that people could say that Vladimir Putin is bluffing, that Russia is weak, that the Russian economy can collapse, to create these fictitious narratives about how weak Russia was to justify the policies that we were embarked on. Nobody wanted to talk about the truth, about the resilience of Russia, about the strength of Russia, about the danger of Russian retaliation. We didn't want to have that conversation. And so there in Europe today, it's the same thing. They've been infected with the same Russophobia that America's been infected with. What this means is that when they speak about Russia, it's not that they believe that they can win a nuclear war against Russia. They believe Russia's bluffing. They believe that it's all bluster, that Putin's so weak that the only thing he has left is to rattle that nuclear saber. And that's it. It's an act of desperation. And so they will double down. They say, we're going to double down. We're going to double down. But anybody who knows Russia, who studies Russia, understands that, I mean, there's no bluff here. There's a old saying, that the Russians are slow to harness, quick to ride. And it's a good thing, especially when it comes to nuclear doctrine. The Russians aren't going to jump on the nuke. You talk about people in Russia. We know Sergei Karaganov is a name that dominates this debate. We know that in 2023, I believe, he first published a paper that postulated the question, would America be willing to trade Poznan for Boston? Meaning that if Russia was to launch a nuclear weapon against the Polish city of Poznan, would the United States retaliate knowing that Russia would take out Boston? And the Karaganov's thing was, no American would trade Boston for Poznan, which means that Russia should take advantage of this by using nuclear weapons preemptively against Europe to send a signal to the Europeans. Well, Vladimir Putin quickly came out and said, no, that's not our policy. But then in 2024, Vladimir Putin invited Sergei Karaganov into the inner circle to redo Russia's nuclear posture. And Russia's nuclear posture, which was published in 2025, set down the conditions under which Russia could use nuclear weapons. One of those is if nuclear powers like the United States provided a non-nuclear power with the ability to strike deep into Russia conventionally, that could trigger a Russian nuclear response. Hence what we talked about with Joe Biden giving Ukraine the ability to use the ATACMS missiles deep. At that time, we talked to people, and for whatever reason, whether we triggered it, we were part of it, Donald Trump did exactly what we were asking Donald Trump to do. He made a public statement saying, when I'm president, I will not authorize ATACMS strikes deep into Russia. And the Russians went, okay, then we're going to hold off. But I think Europe is just dealing with ignorance right now. They think that Russia's bluffing. I don't think that they want a nuclear war, but their incompetence is getting us to the point. I mean, when you have a German foreign minister, a former foreign minister, come out and say that Kaliningrad is German and should be returned to the Germans. When you have Lithuanians saying we can take Kaliningrad, it's just, wait, do you guys understand that the Russians aren't bluffing and this would trigger a conflict that would turn nuclear? this is the danger. This is the absolute danger we have is ignorance. And you said we have a lot of work to do. One of the things that I've been trying to do, and it's very difficult to do, um, is to set up a mock start treaty negotiation. Because sometimes the people in power have to be sort of shown, led to water and said, look, let me teach you how to drink. You're thirsty. Let me teach you how to drink. A mock negotiation. And was working. I had a Russian institution that was ready to do it. Um, some interest on the part of the Russian government. And we were working on the United States, but this was to keep New START revived. And then New START expired, so I did away with it. Maybe it's time to revisit this issue and have mock treaty negotiations where we go through these issues, we work these issues out to see what a treaty could look like. Not because we're not actually negotiating, but go through the process of what a treaty could look like. What are the problems that would come up? And that process is educational. So people are looking at that, and it's not just about arms control, but it's about recognizing the danger that exists. We need to get the European population engaged on this as well. Remember, one of the things that drove INF was the German people coming out in the streets and basically collapsing a government over the INF issue. There were other issues as well, but this was a big deal. In 1982, America put 1 million people into Central Park. June 24th, 1982, 1 million people in Central Park about arms control, supporting arms control. We need this kind of reawakening today. We need people to come out and send a message to their people. And you say you don't want to be alarmist. I mean, the point is, though, Joe,
Too alarmist.
I'm not going to sit here and say that there's going to be a war tomorrow, but if there is, we're all dead. At what point in time in the risk management that goes on in day-to-day life do we find this acceptable? And it just any accident that could happen, any mistake could lead to a crisis where the United States says, oh, we need to use tactical nuclear weapons up front. That's the end of the world at that point in time. What is the percentage that can happen? I don't know. But if there's any percentage that can happen, that's unacceptable. We need to take that percentage to zero, and that can only be done through effective arms control. One is apathy, just the apathy of a citizen that's no longer engaged. I mean, what are we defending? What are we afraid of losing? And when people, don't identify with something, if something's not worth defending, then threats against that don't matter. People also today have the ability to escape into an artificial reality through the internet, through social media, through artificial intelligence. Back in the 80s, you didn't have that. There was no email. You wrote a letter, put it in the post box, and then you waited a week to get a letter back. Life was different, and people were living life, and I think life had meaning. Plus, when we spoke of nuclear war, because in my article I said, let Hiroshima be the reminder. I said, let Hiroshima be the reminder. But, I mean, when people today look at these movies with the computer-generated graphics, I mean, hell, we blow up entire universes. I mean, there's things happening. We become so immune to the horror of a nuclear holocaust. I mean, what happened to Hiroshima is nothing compared to what happens in some of these, terror movies that come out. People stop viewing that as being real. I remember when the movie Oppenheimer came out, and I was so excited about this because I said, this, if it's done right, will bring terror into the hearts of everybody when they see. And I remember watching the scene as they set up the nuclear test, and I'm like, this is going to be it. This is going to be the thing that's going to wake the American people up. They're going to see this and they're going to go, oh my goodness. And it happened, and I went, that didn't scare me. It was nothing because it didn't scare me. It was like cool. People were going, oh, nice effect here, nice effect there. But nobody went, oh my God, that could be happening to us today. People have lost the ability to view nuclear war as real. Look, when I was a kid, and I've told this story before, my dad would go down into a bunker when we lived in West Germany, and that meant that things were happening. and he would tell my mom, they had a code word, The Last Babylon, which is the name of a book that was published in the 1950s, 1960s about nuclear war. And if he called my mom and said The Last Babylon, that meant that he was going to the bunker and maybe it's time to get the kids together and start looking at family photo albums because bad things could happen and we may not wake up in the morning, kind of stuff. And I remember one time there was an The Last Babylon moment. I think it happened twice when we were in Germany. And the next morning, of course, we were alive, so we had to go to school. Now imagine going to school, knowing that your dad's in the bunker and that means the world's going to end. And so you're going to school and everything. Now, I played football at that time, and I remember going out for football practice, and the A40 highway was going by, and trucks would go by, and the sun would hit the rear view mirrors, and you get that flash. And so I'm sitting there trying to focus on football, and I come in, and all of a sudden you see that flash, and the first thing in my mind was, "Oh, damn, that's it." And then you're looking and you're like, oh, but the adrenaline, I mean, it wasn't good adrenaline, it was terror. I hated that, but we need that today. We need every American to live in terror and understand what it means. The concept of that flash turning into the thermonuclear explosion that immediately consumes you and everything around you, and you're gone forever. There's nothing left. And that when it happens, if you live, you don't want to live. Like we have to find a way to. This is why I was trying to make a movie called 38 Minutes, and I'm going to revive this project now because, I stopped it again because the goal of 38 minutes. 38 minutes is the time frame that the people of Hawaii, remember that when they got the missile launch warning.
Yes.
And for
Yeah.
38 minutes, they thought they were all going to die. I mean, people were literally panicked running around because missiles were inbound. This is real. This is not a drill. And they're going, where can we go? Jim Carrey famously talks about getting a phone call from his producer. And she said, do you want to meet? And he said, I'm not going to spend the last 10 minutes of my life. Okay, he said, I'm going on the beach and I'm just going to sit there and watch life before life ends. We have to capture that. We have to bottle that. We have to bottle that fear that those people felt and get it out to the American public. So I'm going to revive this project. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but we have to train people to be afraid of nuclear weapons because they're not today. They're just simply not. They don't think it's real. They think it's it's a bluff. They can't comprehend because it's so insane, Joe. It's, during the Cold War, we experienced, the Soviet Union, the Soviet threat, the ideological threat, better dead than red, kill a commie for mommy, Sputnik. And so there was sort of a logic behind Armageddon. We understood, we didn't agree with it, but we understood that this was real, that this is really happening. And we understood why it was happening. But then the Soviet Union collapsed. And that complete foundation of logic went away. And so people today they can't go from A to Z. During the Cold War, we went A, B, C, Cuban Missile Crisis, D, E, F, G, Prague, H, I, J, this. And there was this escalation of things that happened that we went, oh, God, yeah, boom. Today, there's none of that. Nobody looks at Russia today and says, oh, we fear existentially, or China. I mean, China's a cool place. Hell, you go to China, you can go out in a AI-driven drone. I mean, they literally have flying cars in China now. You can go in there and they fly you to where you want to go. China's cool. High-speed trains, all this cool stuff. Nobody's looking at China going, they have DF-41s, most advanced ICBMs possible, that if fired, one DF-41 would take out the west coast of the United States. Nobody thinks about what would happen with 100 kiloton warhead blows up over LA and the amount of death that would happen. No one thinks about that anymore. They don't understand that in China, there is this capability, not just to fly cool drones and all this stuff, but to destroy America. In Russia, the Sarmat missile, one Sarmat missile, the heavy ICBM, will take out Europe, will take out all of Europe. One. And the Russians have a whole bunch of them. They have the Poseidon, which can sit off the coast. Right now, it's an underwater remote drone. They can fire it from their submarine, and it sits off the coast at the bottom, undetectable. And when triggered, comes up a huge, massive bomb